everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. In the last few months, ever since October 7th, we've had huge protests in the United States and around the world against Israel and for Hamas. The Jewish people have been under growing scrutiny and growing persecution in the West and in general. And obviously the people of Israel, where I am, have had their share of struggles and violence and death, etc. We've seen the world in its hypocrisy and double standard towards the state of Israel, but especially on college campuses in the U.S., we've seen some things that we've never seen before, protests that are explicitly anti-Israel and pro-Hamas. Today's guest is someone who I think can shed light on what's happening in America, both economically, obviously, when you hear who we have, and both what's happening and also what's happening at college campuses, because he's a former president of the University of Harvard University. Professor Lawrence J. Summers is the Charles W. Eliot University Professor and President Emeritus at Harvard University. He served as the 71st Secretary of the Treasury under President Bill Clinton and the Director of the National Economic Council for President Barack Obama. And he's someone who I think his voice is important to hear in these days because of his double experiences. Number one, he was in to presidents, Democratic presidents. We now have a Democrat president in the White House, and he was important in the university system at Harvard, which has been scrutinized a lot since October 7th, as we all know. And so I think it's important that we talk to him, and I think you'll enjoy our conversation. Professor Larry Summers, it's an honor to talk to you. Been a big fan and admirer for many years. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so in an ultra-Orthodox community. And for some reason, even though we're Orthodox, we don't have TV, but I did know who you are in the Clinton years. So it's an honor. First of all, thank you for coming.
I'm very glad to be with you, Ariel.
First question is, we've seen since October 7th, basically the entire U.S. have these huge protests, which obviously, freedom of speech is very important to me and to you, but a lot of these protests have been very threatening to Jewish people and campuses, Jewish students. So as a Jewish American, and you were it's important to say, the first Jewish president of Harvard, how do you feel, just on a personal level, since October 7th?
Appalled, almost sickened by the pervasive is too strong a word, by the extent of anti-Semitism in leading American universities. There are very difficult questions about how to draw lines. Is there a distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? What kinds of statements constitute anti-Semitism? It's clear that Israeli policy should be open to debate and to vigorous criticism, even in a staunch ally like the United States. And it's reasonable for people to debate whether the United States should be a staunch ally of Israel. But there is much that has happened on college campuses, much that has been driven by progressives that is anti-Semitic on any reasonable definition of that term. There were traditional anti-Semitisms of the extreme populist variety. There was anti-Semitism of a kind of genteel wasp culture that excluded people who were thought to be pushy from golf clubs and the like. This is something different. This is an idea that somehow to be progressive requires one to demonize Israel and raise questions about Jewish people. I suppose someone who was aware of Marx's anti-Semitism and Marx's highly disparaging comments about Jews and aware of how much resonance he still has in parts of academic communities, even after all the lessons of the 20th century. I suppose somebody who felt that way would not be quite as surprised as I am, not that it exists, but how pervasive it is. I wondered for a long time why there were movements in American university campuses to divest or boycott Israel. And it did seem to me that there was no comparable degree of concern about countries whose human rights violations were on any conceivable metric vastly greater. I have a kind of test that I apply when I hear someone express their passion for Palestinian rights, which is, do they express any concern about anything that any country other than Israel has done that has been adverse to Palestinian interests? And if the answer is no, as I have to say it is most of the time on college campuses, I do detect a whiff of anti-Semitism.
Just a whiff? Sometimes I detect more than a whiff.
I detect more, but sometimes I certainly detect more. But I'm saying if anyone who is taking the Palestinian cause and is not recognizing any failures of any other country to vis-a-vis the Palestinian cause has to have suspect motives.
Yeah.
I want to say just one other thing, though, about this frequency of anti-Semitism, because I think it's important to understand. I used a phrase 20 years ago when I was president of Harvard in addressing the divestiture movement. I spoke of well-intentioned people advocating actions that would be anti-Semitic in effect, if not their intent. And I think there are many people who deep in their hearts are not anti-Semitic, but shallow in their brains are not terribly thoughtful, who are advocating things that if you trace their logic are anti-Semitic, but they don't really have the intent of being anti-Semitic.
Right.
They have the intent of caring about disadvantaged people. And that does not excuse them. But I do think that distinction between anti-Semitic in effect, if not intent, is a helpful one.
Professor Saammers, just on a personal level, you've been Jewish and in America for many years. Was it ever as bad as it is now? I mean, I remember when I was young, I'm much younger than you are, but when I was young, there was always a whiff, as you said, of anti-Semitism everywhere, but including the US. I don't think it was ever this bad. I grew up, as I said, in Brooklyn. There's protests outside of the synagogue where I used to go. So and there was never these things. So have you ever experienced something like this?
I grew up with an awareness that in certain suburbs not far from mine, there didn't seem to be many Jewish families, that there were clubs where people swam or played sports that didn't seem to have many Jewish members. But the kind of thing we are seeing now, the kind of chanting, the kind of posts that one is seeing on social media in college campuses, the kind of demonization of Israel that we are seeing, this is all new to my experience.
I guess my next question would be about the actual college campuses. As someone who lives on college campuses, in terms that's your life, life's work. What are we to make? Obviously, Harvard has been in the news, but not only Harvard. My aunt lives next to NYU, Columbia. What are we to make about what's happening on the college campuses? We spoke about the prevalence of it, but the actual administrators and the policymakers, and even there's been calls for the Congress to do different legislation. How do you see just the way college campuses from this episode grow or don't grow? What will be the implications of what we're seeing?
I think there has been a colossal moral failure on the part of academic leaders. And that moral failure manifests itself as a double standard between different kinds of prejudice, where they have been aggressive, extraordinarily aggressive with respect to any sign of racism or sexism or a variety of other kinds of discrimination. They have been often too close to insensate, or at least unwilling to act in the face of incidents of anti-Semitism. And I think it's important to understand the reason why. It is not because the people in leadership positions are not good people, and it is not because they are unaware of how bad anti-Semitism is. It is because on most college campuses, there is no constituency for racism. There is no constituency for homophobia. There is no constituency for anti-Catholicism. And so to be very vigorous speaking out against those abuses is easy because it doesn't generate an argument. But there are hundreds of people in positions of academic authority as instructors or professors or administrators who believe in academically boycotting Israel. And that makes it much harder to stand up for what leaders know is right. And they have been reluctant, at best, to take that step. So when they have been confronted with proposals to divest Israel, to their credit, they have not supported those proposals, but the rationales they have offered are general rationales with respect to divestment, not arguments that point up the particular perversity of singling out the world's only Jewish state.
Right.
And I think that is a regrettable failure. I have always said that academic freedom is of paramount value, but also that academic freedom does not include freedom from criticism. And it is the job and the task of leaders to set a tone by being prepared to criticize and condemn speech within their community, not to punish it, not to cause people to lose their jobs or lose their right to study,
Right.
but to make clear that there are moral norms within a community. And that is a task that leaders have taken to with vigor and enthusiasm where the issue is racism. And I think it is tragic that they have fallen short where the issue is anti-Semitism.
Do you think, like I asked just quickly, that there will be, just because of the vacuum that, so to speak, that what you just said, that a lot of the administrators and the people on the top are not willing to confront the problem, that there will be at some point attempts from the outside to force some sort of, I don't know, from Congress or even the president or whatever?
I think there are very strong pressures. We have laws in the United States, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act,
right,
that speaks of discriminatory environments, and Harvard is only one of many universities that is both subject to extensive litigation and investigation by the Congress and investigation by the Education Department, part of the executive branch of the federal government. Steps that have been taken on college campuses and testimonies that have been given have literally been condemned from the podium of the White House briefing room. So I think there's no question that there are pressures that are being brought to bear. My view is that apart from how problematic this anti-Semitism is, that in general, universities need to have a compact with the broader society.
yes,
Universities as institutions will not take political positions, and society will respect universities' right to govern themselves. And I think that is the best way forward on these kinds of issues. And I have to say that I think there is freedom for professors to say things that I find terrible and loathsome in their private capacities. I think that it's appropriate, painful as I may find it, for readings to be put on reading lists in classes that I find sickening. But I cannot understand how deans, administrators, people in leadership positions can be permitted to remain in those leadership positions when they endorse positions that are anti-Semitic in effect, if not intent.
yeah,
And it seems to me that it's a central obligation of university leaders to prevent others from instrumentalizing the university by causing the University X Center on Middle East Studies to issue proclamations, or Center on Human Rights of Harvard University to issue statements. I don't think any of us have the right to arrogate to ourselves the ability to speak for a university. And I think that's another area in which university leaders have failed.
Professor Summers, one last question on this, and then I have more, I think more interesting questions, because everything you've said so far, I agreed with you, so it's good. My last question is, there's been a lot of talk about the money that Qatar has poured into specifically the Middle Eastern studies and those departments all over the U.S. I think almost $1 trillion over the last 10, 15 years, they said. It depends how you look at it. But the point is that, do you think there's any do you think any of this is being borne out because of the influence that Qatar has on the actual syllabuses in the classrooms?
In all honesty, I don't know. When I was president of Harvard, I gave back a gift from the Emirates.
Wow.
Because I felt that the pressures being brought as to how those funds were going to be used were inappropriate, given our commitment to academic freedom. I don't know the history and all the facts that have happened with respect to the funds you refer to. So I don't want to make an accusation where I don't have the evidence, but I also don't want to make an exoneration based on ignorance. I just don't know.
Okay. I want to ask you another personal question. When I reached out to you, I thought it was a long shot to talk to you. And, Professor Larry Summers, what is he going to talk to a newspaper in Israel? And your people said it was important for you to talk to us. So maybe explain to us why it is important to you to talk to an Israeli newspaper, why it is important to you to talk to the Israeli public from America. What would you like to say before we get into economic questions?
There are many of us in the United States who may not be particularly religious, who do not speak Hebrew, who nonetheless, who do not, certainly in my case, agree with many, many policy choices that Israel has made in recent years, who think that in important ways Israel has been strategically unwise and made it easier for its adversaries as a consequence, and in some cases has violated some basic precepts of morality. But with all of that, who share a deep commitment to the Israeli state, to Israel's democracy, and within the limits of what we can do, have Israel's back. And so I have felt that when I'm asked to participate in a conversation about the United States and Israel with Israeli friends, that's a conversation that I want to participate in.
Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you for that. It's heartwarming. And so I guess my next question is just about your expertise as economics. And we're looking at Israel. The Israeli economy has been, everybody for the last 10, 15 years talking about how the startup nation, etc. Since the war, the Israeli economy is obviously in a lot of trouble. We've had expenditures going up. The budget for defense spending will obviously have to be extremely large, starting off from a very large standpoint. The credit rating score for Israel has gone down by a number of the agencies. How do you see, hopefully the war will end soon. Hopefully we'll get back the hostages. We're all praying for that. Just last night, there was another video of the actual kidnapping of 4 or 5 of the women soldiers who are still hostage. But hopefully we'll at some point get out of this stronger as a people. Where do you see the Israeli economy going from here?
I'm not an expert on the Israeli economy, and I think any economy subject to the kind of attack that Israel has suffered and the kind of ongoing conflict and the kind of ongoing insecurity given Israel's location near such forceful adversaries has to come with uncertainty.
Yeah.
I have a faith in the capacity of Israeli entrepreneurship, the faith in an open society where people are free to argue vigorously and innovate and pursue their dreams, a society where young people have this incredible maturing experience that they don't in most other countries of military service.
Yes.
It leaves them at a young age with a capacity to do things and to achieve things that's very great. And at a time when innovation and startups are especially important, having a remarkable generation of young people is an especial economic asset for any country. So I think Israel is a country that will be able to manage this economic challenge and this economic struggle. I do have to say that I think an important part of that is Israel maintaining true to itself and its most enduring values. And, the controversy before everything was swept away by October 7th and its horror became really the only thing one could talk about, there was substantial controversy over judicial reform in Israel. And as an outsider, I saw a case for making sure that a judiciary did not overreach and that which should be within the bounds of legislative and executive governance remained in that. I found the idea that any law could be rejected as unreasonable to be rather sweeping. But at the same time, I spoke with many, many people who felt that some of the judicial reform proposals represented a kind of excess and a turning away against rights and a potential rule by mob that I felt was very, very threatening to the Israeli venture capital community, to Israeli entrepreneurship. So I'm optimistic that this is a storm that Israel can weather, but I think it would be a mistake not to recognize that the character of the economy depends upon the character of the society.
Yes.
And a commitment to open democracy, a commitment to tolerance, a resistance to populist prejudice. These are all a clear feeling for wanting to assert one's rights, but at the same time to stay right with the international community. I think all of that is also immensely important for the Israeli economy.
I agree. I'll just say from my point of view that Netanyahu, when he was the prime minister a long time ago, he was against these judicial reforms in a lot of the way that they were presented, and he changed his mind. And one needs to ask maybe why, and that's not for us to say, but it is for us to maybe explain that things that were maybe in the past, even the right in Israel was totally behind it. Suddenly everything changed, and we should, like you said, maybe stay more to the center of way. If you want to make judicial reform, make it more neutral, more that both sides can get behind it and negotiate, and not everybody go to the street and start screaming at each other. So I think that, just as a general rule, you're right on that. Maybe one or two last questions, because I know your time is short. We do in Israel, everything that happens in America is something that is important to us. So I wanted to ask just in general about the American economy right now. Maybe two small questions. Number one, American entitlements. It seems that every time we talk about in America the entitlement reform, it becomes a political hot, potato. But it is, I think, the main thing that's, down the future going to have to be, someone's going to have to do something about it either way. And nobody seems to even want to be talking about it. So what do you think is going to happen in the end? Because it seems right or left, something's going to have to happen.
I don't know. There's a quote that's attributed to Winston Churchill that the United States always does the right thing, but only after exhausting the alternatives. I'm not sure whether Churchill ever really said that, but I think it's a good principle. And I believe in America's resilience. I believe in the power of self-denying prophecy. People predict that very adverse things will happen, and perhaps because of those predictions, the adverse things tend not to materialize.
I agree. So first of all, maybe one more question just before you go. I know I'm picking your brain. Do you think that maybe I'll just ask you one last thing. In all the polls, when people are asked about the economy, they say that they don't feel that it's working for them. On the other hand, the economy, the numbers are are getting better all the time. So how are we as just readers of what's happening to look at the dissonance between that? In terms of, you spoke a lot about in the past about inflation. It did take longer, like you said, but it is a little bit coming down lately, and the job numbers have been good throughout the last few years. But on the other hand, people aren't feeling it, so to speak.
It's sort of a two-part answer, I think. One part is people still see high prices,
Yes.
even if prices are not rising as rapidly as they did. And, you know, I had a meal in a restaurant I hadn't eaten at in a year or two. And when I signed the check, I was kind of shocked by how expensive the meal for two had become. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have those kinds of reactions, and they're not asking about the price this month relative to the price 2 months ago. They're asking about the price relative to the price they remember. And I think the other part of it is maybe a slightly more technical point that for various good reasons, when economists define the cost of living, they do not include the cost of money. But when people think about the cost of living, they think about the cost of money. And so car prices may not have gone up, but monthly car payments have gone up for people who borrow to buy a car.
Right.
House prices have gone up, but the cost of being in a new house, including the monthly mortgage payment, has gone up much more. And I think that's an important part of the story.
Yeah. Professor Saammers, I have to say it was it was an honor to talk to you. Could you just tell our audience that tell our audience if you're planning to come to Israel in the near future, and on a personal note, if you are, let us know. We'd love to have you for Shabbat dinner. I know you said you're not religious, but we would love to have you anyway.
Thank you very much. I do expect to visit Israel in the next few months, and it will be a very meaningful visit for me.
So when you come, please let us know. Our newspaper would love to meet you, even off record, and talk to you just for coffee. So thank you so much. It was an honor talking to you, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Saammers.